With the war in the Middle East now and the global impacts of it, Jennifer Parker is an adjunct professor at the University of Western Australia's Defence and Security Institute. She's also a former naval officer with experience in the Middle East. She joins us now from our Parliament House studio. Good morning to you, Jennifer Parker. First of all, I'll get your response to the news this morning of this US blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. What do you make of that?
Hey Joe, look, thanks so much for having me on. I'd just like to say congratulations to Vice Admiral Mark Hammond, Rear Admiral Matt Buckley and Lieutenant General Susan Coyle, my former colleagues, on their appointments today. Now turning to the blockade, look, I think actually this is a positive announcement. Now, your viewers are going to be probably surprised by that, so let me explain why. Clearly the negotiations that took 21 hours were not successful. And if we think back to the JCPOA arrangements, the last time there was a deal on nuclear between the US and Iran, that took 20 months to negotiate. The US has assessed that they need to have greater economic leverage over Iran, I would assume, and stop Iran being resupplied with missiles and weapon systems. And there is some rumours in US media that China is looking to resupply Iran with certain shoulder-launched anti-air capabilities. So a blockade is a way to do that. Now, many reports today said it's a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. That's not correct. That is what President Trump said. However, the Central Command, who is in charge of this campaign, have come out and announced a formal blockade in a notice to mariners, which says they are blockading vessels going to and from Iranian ports, so not the Strait of Hormuz. And this allows them to exert that economic pressure to get some leverage over Iran, but also restrict any resupply of weapon systems into Iran.
I want to get your thoughts on the legalities around what's happening here, both of the blockade of Iranian ports, as you were saying, but also Iran demanding the right to collect tolls from vessels passing through the strait. What are the legalities around these things that are happening?
Well, when we think of the Strait of Hormuz, it is an international strait, and within it, it has a traffic separation scheme that goes through the middle, outside of Iranian territorial waters and outside of Omani territorial waters. So as an international strait, no country is allowed to exact control over that strait, and certainly they're not allowed to try and charge tolls or force shipping to go in a different direction, which is what Iran has been doing. It's also been attacking ships in that strait, which is also illegal and a war crime generally if these are civilian merchant mariners. Now, when we think about the blockade of Iranian ports, this is legal in war. Now, earlier in this year, President Trump announced a blockade on Venezuela. Now, that actually wasn't really a blockade. It was a boarding of certain stateless vessels. It was effective, but it wasn't a naval blockade. Because Israel, US and Iran are at war, then the US is lawfully allowed to enact a naval blockade on Iran if they meet certain conditions. Some of those conditions include they need to allow food and other critical supplies to support the civilian population to go in to the port. The second is it needs to be applied impartially, which means applied to all vessels regardless of their flag, and the US have said that. So this isn't a blockade of Iranian vessels, it is a blockade of all vessels going in and out of Iran. It also needs to be effective. There's a few other legal conditions. The way the US have announced this, it hasn't come into force yet. It is consistent with international law and the law of naval warfare. How they enact it may be a different thing, but again, I think this is probably an appropriate step to apply economic leverage that does not involve the destruction of Iranian infrastructure.
What is for sure is that we're not seeing free-flowing activity through the Strait of Hormuz. So what needs to happen to restore traffic there, in your view?
Right, so look, the Strait of Hormuz isn't closed. It's constantly reported it's closed. What has happened is ships are deterred from going through. Normally you'd have about 130 ships go through every day. Over the last 6 weeks, there's only been 130 in total, and most of those have been Iranian ships. To restore confidence in ships going through, then you need to demonstrate to them that there is no risk. Now, part of that requires naval presence, and we saw on Sunday 2 US naval ships go through the Strait of Hormuz. I think that was part of a start to a reassurance campaign. 2, the US will need to address the mines question, either clearly state that Iran hasn't laid mines, which I suspect is the case, or if Iran has laid mines, clear them. And there are US mine clearance assets on their way across the Indian Ocean now to do that. Once that has happened, then there'll need to be information sharing with those merchant ships about what is and is not safe, and those merchant ships will need to feel comfortable to go through. That's going to take some time, but I think what we're seeing now is a change in a phase of the activity from prior to the ceasefire, attacks on key military objectives in Iran, to now a focus on reassuring ships and reducing Iran's creating an economic impact for Iran. I mentioned 130 ships have gone through that strait in the last 6 weeks. Most of those have actually been Iranian, carrying Iranian fuel, which has allowed Iran to continue to fund the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' resistance in this conflict.
Jennifer Parker, we really appreciate your time and analysis this morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.